Welcome back to my studio. Today, I want to talk about something that I know can hold a lot of painters back. This idea that if you spend too much time looking at other artists' work, it somehow makes you less original or less creative, or the work that you make becomes less authentically you. I've heard this from so many artists who are trying to loosen up their style and find their own voice. The fear really seems to come down to this idea that by looking at the work of others, you're just going to lose your authenticity. But I'm here to tell you that that's not how creativity works, and put your mind at ease if this is something you've been worrying about. If anything, isolating yourself from other artists can actually be really holding back your growth and keeping you stuck. So I'm going to use an example that I think will really help to illustrate exactly why this is. So I want you to imagine a Michelin star chef. Do you think that she would refuse to eat any food that she didn't personally cook because it would mean that somehow she wasn't cooking from her authentic voice? It's kind of absurd, right? Like, a chef like that would miss out on all of the richness, the interesting new techniques, the innovations, and just the plain old inspiration that comes from experiencing other people's cuisine. The same is true with painting. Our influences don't dilute our originality. They actually help us to refine it and to clarify it. I was recently rereading the book Decoding Greatness, which talks about how true innovation often comes from this balance between the familiar and the novel. Interestingly, there seems to be, from a human psychological perspective, a limit on just how much novelty people can handle before it becomes just too radical. And this isn't just about artwork or music, but I'm going to use a music example here first. So in the book, the author talks about Jim Morrison writing Light My Fire. The song didn't come from nowhere. It was actually this combination of John Coltrane's improvisation, some Latin rhythms, and a Bach-inspired introduction to the song. This is how creativity works. You take what moves you, you combine it and amalgamate it into something that's new and do it in your own way, and suddenly you've created something new. The same goes for actually just about everything. Whether it's new technology, whether it's a new kind of style of writing, whether it's new cuisine we want to eat, and certainly painting. There's this great line in Decoding Greatness that's actually a Saul Bellow quote, and that is, "A writer is a reader who is moved to emulation." And I think that applies to us as painters as well. We are moved and inspired by the works of others, and that is often exactly what leads us to create. But just because you're inspired by something doesn't mean your work is any less your own. In fact, looking at others' art can be honestly the key to unlocking your own authentic expression. So because of this, one of the first lessons in Decoding Greatness is to actually become a collector. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go out and buy art, but you do want to start curating a collection of the examples of greatness that move you. Now, the book is general purpose, so it's not talking about painting explicitly or exclusively, but I'm going to talk about this in the context of painting here. So to collect examples of greatness that move you, these could be paintings that just really stand out to you, or specific brushstrokes in those paintings that you love, or the way that light is used over and over in pieces. When you study that work and understand what resonates with you, you start to notice the patterns. What sets the pieces you love apart? What makes them great, in your opinion? It's this comparison that really helps you to identify the key ingredients that you can bring into your own work. But here's the trick. You don't want to just go and mimic those things exactly. The goal here isn't to just copy, but it's to evolve. As the book explains, a success formula that works for someone isn't necessarily going to work for you in the same way. The truth is that you need to collect an abundance of influences, and you need to mix and match and combine influences from different sources and see how exactly to amalgamate them in a way that plays to your own strengths. That is where what we call originality comes from. Not in creating something purely in isolation in a vacuum where you have no influences and doing it from scratch, but from transforming what's already out there into something that feels deeply personal. I think that if you have any kind of doubt about how this works, we could talk about it with painting. But again, I'm going to use something simpler that I think will resonate more with you all. So I already used the example of a chef. Let's go instead now to a musician. I love using music as an example here because the truth is that musicians have to copy. If you think about learning the piano or learning the violin, you learn some basic technique through scales, but what you probably spend the bulk of your musical career doing is learning how to copy other people. You play other people's music. If you took somebody and never let them listen to any music ever, and you kept them in isolation and somehow you asked them to go ahead and write a song, it would probably feel really rudimentary at best. Maybe it would just be like very simple percussion, the kind of thing that you could expect like an infant to do if you handed them like a toy drum. But if you give them a few influences, if you just gave them Bach and Mozart to learn from, chances are what they make would be really heavily influenced by those musicians. And so a lot of the time I see this really come out in the form of painters who can't name a single contemporary painter, but they say, I want to paint like Rembrandt and Velázquez. And I mean, that's an incredible goal. They are obviously incredible painters. But if you're not also learning from the ways in which other artists have taken what those painters made and riffed on them and pushed them in new directions and tried new techniques and used new tools and integrated those things into the sensibility of artists like Rembrandt and Velázquez, well, you're probably going to make something that feels like it's already been done. And truthfully, if you find that your genuine influences are all painters who, are the old masters, that's not a bad thing. But it is really helpful to spend time looking at other painters who are influenced by the old masters. Learn from how they're combining modern techniques with that classical sensibility. So this brings me to something that I see a lot, this gap between where you are and where you want to be. The more you study the masters, the more you might actually feel discouraged, thinking, well, I'll never be that good. But here's the thing, the gap is exactly what you want. It means you have really good taste, and that is an indicator of potential. It is okay to feel that gap. What separates the professionals from the amateurs is the willingness to work through it for as long as it takes. And that's where having a roadmap becomes essential. You need to know where you're going and what steps will actually get you there. Decoding Greatness talks about creating blueprints, so high-level outlines that help demystify really complex works. When you break down a painting into its key components, so the composition, the drawing, the value, the color, the edges, you can start to actually see a really clear path forward. What's the lighting like in the pieces that move you? What's the brushwork like? These are the kinds of things that you can then focus on in your own work. I'm going to share a quick example of this in action. So I remember there was a Richard Schmid memorial event. And I believe that Tina Garrett was presenting. And I'm hoping that I'm getting all of these details right because I'm literally telling this story off the cuff. So Tina was telling the story of interacting with Richard Schmid, and she saw this painting of his and was just so enamored by it. Like, she was just so taken by this painting. And she used some word to describe the painting that Richard took issue with. I think she maybe said, like, it's magical. And the idea of what she was communicating was that she couldn't even imagine how Richard made this painting come to life. And she used a lot of like more emotional, abstract words to describe what made the painting resonate with her. And Richard just like would not let her get away with it. He insisted that she actually break the painting down into the concrete, tangible aspects of the painting that she was resonating with so strongly. And now I won't remember exactly what Tina said. You would have to go find this, the recording of this event, or ask her personally to retell the story. But if memory serves, she said something like, Well, the way that you just really compressed the values in this pile of leaves and allowed yourself to really play with color, but to simplify a lot of the edges and unify a lot of the big shapes through your control of the values. It just feels so elegantly done, and it really evokes what it would have looked like in person, but through a way that feels really elegant and painterly. And that's what Richard was actually looking for. When you spend time with pieces that really inspire you and you start to analyze them in terms of their concrete components, suddenly you begin to think in very actionable terms that you can apply to your own work. And so you stop just feeling like there is something mystical that stands between you and the art you want to make. And instead, you realize there are very concrete steps that you can take yourself to be able to implement that in what you're painting. So if you're someone who feels like you've been spinning your wheels, unsure of how to loosen up or break through to that next level, I want to encourage you to start studying the work that excites you more intentionally. Don't be afraid to analyze what you love about other artists' work and figure out how you can evolve those elements in your own style. And if you need help creating a clear roadmap, I want you to go ahead and check out this video on how to make a vision board for your art goals. It'll help you to define a really clear direction so that you can start to paint the ways that you've always dreamt of. All right, I hope this video has been genuinely helpful. Let me know what your painting goals are or who your favorite influences are down in the comments. For anyone who's going to check out that video on how to create your roadmap, let me know how that goes in the comments of that video after you give it a watch. I can't wait to hear how it goes. And until then, enjoy taking in and being inspired by the art of others, and happy painting.